Friends, ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Justices, Your Grace, Commissioners, thank you for being here today. Sorry about the rush. We all know we got caught up in the Commonwealth traffic. We're going to run a piece of media prepared by Mitchell Gerber, who has graciously put together an extraordinary delegation with David Kilgore, Ethan Gutman, and Dr. Enver Tohti, who have joined Mitchell later on today. I understand they'll be addressing Parliament. So a very, very propitious day for the extraordinary work that these extraordinary gentlemen are doing. After you see the film and hear their witness testimonies, you will understand the gravity and the nature of the subject they deal with.
We call it a new form of evil on the world. It's never been done by any government in the past, to take a large group of its own people and say, we're going to kill you without any kind of a trial, and we're going to sell your vital organ parts.
An individual from the United States or Canada, for example, could anticipate undergoing transplantation on a specified date.
It's a crime against humanity. It's abhorrent, and it needs to stop.
If you're going to go to China and you're going to get a liver transplant during the 3 weeks you are there, then that means someone is going to go schedule an execution, blood type and tissue type the potential executee, and have them ready to go before you need to leave.
Starting at the end of 1999, the number of transplants taking place just exploded.
China carries out more organ transplant surgeries than any country besides the United States. But unlike other countries, China has no effective organ donation program. That's because culturally, Chinese people believe the body must stay intact even after death. China's Deputy Minister of Health, Huang Jiefu, has suggested that there are 7,000 transplants every year from the deceased, and that more than 90% come from executed prisoners. The number of criminal executions in China is classified as a state secret, but Amnesty International's estimate is about 1,700.
The numbers just didn't add up. It's just too large of a discrepancy there.
With only 1,700 executed criminals and no effective donation system, where do the rest of the organs come from? Zhao Shuhuan was put in a Chinese labor camp because she practices Falun Gong.
我每到一个劳教所，他都会让我们检查身体，给我们抽血验血。每个劳教所都是。
We estimate that in the period between 2000 and 2005, there are 41,500 transplants which have no other explained source.
I'm absolutely convinced that over a long period from 1999 onwards, organ harvesting from prisoners has been taking place, especially with Falun Gong.
他领了到他那个马三家教养院有医院呢。 那个医院就是做我这理解好像就是验尿啊，抽干戈。
Doctors would come into the camps. They would look in their eyes. They would examine their organs with ultrasound and the like. And they were the only people in these camps who were medically examined thoroughly.
In 2006, two Canadians, international human rights lawyer David Matas and former Secretary of State for Asia Pacific David Kilgore, started to investigate allegations of forced organ harvesting in China. They found at least 52 points of circumstantial evidence, including websites of Chinese hospitals offering matching organs in less than a week.
It's just not possible unless you have an unlimited source of organs. And these are people who are alive. We're talking about live donors. The actual transplant surgery itself was the form of execution. These were living people that were killed for their organs.
Makes you think of some grotesque restaurant where you go in and you pick your lobster in a tank. But these are human beings we're talking about.
The military's making money off of it, the hospitals are making money off of it, the middlemen are making money off of it. And we talk about money, we're talking about a multi-million-dollar operation.
Journalist and author Ethan Gutman decided to carry out his own independent investigation.
We had witnesses of disappearances, people who'd been examined and then had disappeared, busloads, entire prison wards which had been emptied out. The signs began to look like something much, much bigger.
Like Tibetans and house Christians, millions of Falun Gong practitioners are being persecuted in China for their beliefs. In 1999, Communist Party leader Jiang Zemin issued orders to break them financially, ruin their reputations, and destroy them physically. Since then, thousands of Falun Gong practitioners have disappeared without a trace.
What happened to the disappeared? They, as far as we know, they're still there in these camps. Many of them been killed through organ harvesting, but the rest are still there, and they're the organ data bank for China.
Around 1999, there were around 150 transplant centers. 6-7 years later, they had 600 transplantation centers. This is an increase by 300% within such a short period of time without an organ donation program.
Military hospitals get watched in China, okay? There is nothing they can do without the party central taking note of what they're doing. Was this run by triads? No. This is run by the state. This was murder, and it came from the state.
This is a crime against humanity. We should do our best to identify those specific individuals who are engaged in this and put them on the list of people who deserve to be brought to justice.
In 2006, when this came out and we realized that they were killing prisoners of conscience for their organs, it was doctors that took the front line in trying to stop this. Every day there are a dozen of people that are executed or killed for organs in China. So we have to bring out the message, we have to inform medical doctors to stop this practice.
But it's not only the medical community that's getting informed. The U.S. State Department mentioned allegations of forced organ harvesting in its annual Human Rights Report on China in 2011 for the first time. On October 3rd, 106 U.S. congressional representatives signed this bipartisan Dear Colleague letter to the State Department, demanding they reveal information on organ harvesting that they may have obtained from their sources in China.
This barbaric human rights abuse must be stopped, but to stop it, we first have to further expose it.
And with even more petitions circulating online, the issue is starting to get worldwide attention, but more needs to be done.
In the late 90s, Chinese government surveys said up to 70 million people were practicing Falun Gong daily. Health bills were decreasing, crime rates were falling, and morality was rising. So why were these people targeted for elimination and organ harvesting? Mona Ye was one of the millions meditating in parks every day.
There was a park across the street from my house. Because the first exercise site couldn't hold so many people anymore, it divided into the second, the third, the fourth. So at every street corner and in every park, you could see people practicing Falun Gong.
There was from different kind in society. It was many policemen and military. It was just fundamental part of society at that time, and everybody
knew somebody who practiced.
Falun Gong is a traditional practice of self-cultivation, a practice of slow-moving exercises, meditation, and studying of the principles of truthfulness, compassion, and tolerance, and trying to adopt those into your life.
While morning exercises had always been popular in China, Falun Gong brought more than just health benefits.
For thousands of years, the Chinese people have believed in Buddhas and Taos and becoming an immortal. Falun Gong really dared to talk about these things. And immediately people took it to heart. Oh, the true ancient good things of China have come back.
However, after 50 years of political campaigns to destroy traditional beliefs, any revival of spirituality was seen as a threat to communist rule.
Since I was 11, I experienced all of the Chinese Communist Party's campaigns. Group after group of good people were targeted. There was no faith, no truth. Falun Gong stood in stark contrast with communist ideology. So it would be very hard for it to be tolerated by the CCP.
With more practitioners than members in the Communist Party, the party chief, Jiang Zemin, saw it as a threat to his power and overruled the government support of Falun Gong.
Jiang Zemin issued order, set up special office called 610 Office, in charge of the nationwide campaign of persecution.
Known as China's Gestapo, the 610 agency was above the law and could use any and all means necessary to achieve its sole mission, to eliminate Falun Gong. The nationwide campaign began July 1999.
People were disappearing. I couldn't find my friends. You know, one day there were 30 of us in the park, and the next day they're gone, and in the middle of the park, tacked on the tree was a government declaration that this has been outlawed.
First time I heard about the persecution, I didn't believe it at the first. And when I heard my mom was into labor camp, I was very worried. And later on, my sister was put in the labor camp. My younger brother was put into jail. Basically, my family is just torn apart. When this family is torn apart, actually, I feel inside torn apart.
Like many practitioners, Pan Xi went to Beijing to appeal. She was arrested and imprisoned in the infamous Masanja labor camp.
I often hear the sounds of electric batons, and frequently in the middle of the night, I hear heart-wrenching screams from practitioners.
The goal was to make practitioners sign a statement to guarantee they would stop practicing, that they would renounce their faith.
She took the electric baton. When she was beating me, it felt like it was directly piercing through my heart. It was like my entire body started convulsing, like it was going to fall apart.
I personally have a friend whose mother was submerged in a cage. They put her in a little cage, they put him into sewer water in complete darkness for days. These are the different methods they're using on Falun Gong practitioners around the country, trying to transform them.
Hu Zhiming was teaching practitioners how to break through internet censorship in Shanghai when he was arrested.
Police did not know what I did, but they knew that I practiced Falun Gong. So they arrested me first. Then they investigated my background and arrested everyone who had been in touch with me.
After 2 years of interrogation, he was sentenced to 4 years at a Shanghai prison for teaching others to visit Mingwei.org, which reports daily on the persecution.
Every morning after I woke up, I was taken to a room and forced to sit about 1 meter away from the TV set and forced to watch videos slandering Falun Gong. This kind of brainwashing did not work. So they changed to another approach, which was intensive slave labor.
Outside the labor camps, propaganda campaigns against Falun Gong were running 24/7 on all media.
Like you turn on the TV, and literally the only way to describe it is propaganda marathons. You'd have mass book burnings, organized by the party. Steamrollers going over Falun Gong cassette tapes and CDs.
Essentially, it's a process of demonizing and dehumanizing, incessant propaganda.
In January 2001, Chinese Central Television broadcast this news that people were setting themselves on fire in Tiananmen Square, and they claimed that these were Falun Gong practitioners.
This propaganda story used a mother and her 12-year-old daughter. It was a major turning point in the CCP's campaign.
They turned Tiananmen Square into a movie set, and they used movie techniques to try to create something, but it was staged.
Because state-run media broadcast it constantly for a year, people around China, their views on Falun Gong started to change.
Initially, the Communist Party was very public about its campaign against Falun Gong. But what happened after about, I would say starting from 2002, is that you started to see really almost more of a media blackout. Falun Gong simply became a taboo topic.
With millions of practitioners in detention, one of the worst crimes in history began taking place in hospitals throughout the country as organ transplants suddenly began to skyrocket.
We've been asked to investigate allegations that there has been harvesting of organs of Falun Gong in China. Our bottom line conclusion, after considering everything as best we could, was that the allegations are true.
I began conducting comprehensive interviews with medical professionals, Chinese law enforcement personnel, and over 50 refugees from the Laogai system. But I estimate that 65,000 Falun Gong were murdered for their organs from 2000 to 2008.
Essentially what organ harvesting means is they're taking Falun Gong practitioners literally like cattle, holding them in prison camps, testing their blood and other vital organs, and when someone comes into the country that needs a heart, a liver, a kidney, they find a match, they take the Falun Gong practitioner, extract their organs, of course killing them in the process. It is literally life and death for many of the upper echelon of the party members that run China to not let the Falun Gong story be told.
Falun Gong has been exemplary in its response. It has never dealt with violence in a violent way. It's always responded with forbearance, with love, with truth, with patience, and ultimately that's going to prevail.
David William Kilgore is a former Canadian Secretary of State and lawyer. He is a human rights activist and author. He ended his 27-year tenure in the House of Commons of Canada as an independent MP. Upon retirement, he was one of the longest current serving members of Parliament and one of the very few who had been elected under both the Progressive Conservative and Liberal banners. Ethan Gutmann is a U.S. investigative writer, human rights defender, author, and former adjunct fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. His writing on China is widely published. He is best known as the author of two books, Losing the New China, a story of American commerce, desire, and betrayal, and The Slaughter, mass killings, organ harvesting, and China's secret solution to its dissident problem. Gutmann has testified before the U.S. Congress, the U.S. House Committee on Foreign Affairs, the European Parliament, and the United Nations. And Dr. Enver Tohti is a renowned surgeon who speaks of the horrific crimes against the Falun Gong by the communist Chinese regime from a uniquely personal perspective. And Mitchell Gerber is an activist from Southern Africa who has dedicated the past 17 years of his life to this issue, which has surely to be one of the most brutal atrocities in modern history. Gentlemen, you're so very welcome here today. We making the time to be here. Mitchell, you'll lead your delegation in addressing the court. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is a very serious discussion that we are having today with the colleagues before you, the distinguished and honorable gentlemen before you. I believe to fail to support what is good and to fail to expose what is evil is unacceptable. I've been dedicated 17 years of my life to expose this. And with all the battle against us in this war to expose the truth and bring this form of evil to light, I will not give up. We will not give up, and we will keep exposing until the mainstream media opens its gates and allows this testimony that you are seeing today become even more relevant in their minds and hearts and souls. So without further ado, David Kilgore will take the podium, and thanks very much for having me again.
Chief Justice, Your Grace, Sasha, of course, commissioners, ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor to be here to speak to you today about this very important matter. I'd like to say I was very much touched by things that were said yesterday by the commissioners, but I must, if I may, single out Commissioner Patel. She didn't know it because we spoke earlier that when she told us about Iqbal, the young boy from Pakistan who was murdered for trying to expose child labor in Pakistan, he said he was tied to the loom. A young Canadian about the same age, 11 or 12, called Craig Kielburger, happened to see that account of his death. And Craig that day went back to his school and started what became Free the Children. His brother Mark joined him. They are now, I believe, in 45 countries. And they're following in the footsteps, as you said yesterday, of Iqbal. So I was really, my spine was when you were talking about that. So let me, I'll give you the shortened version of this. And I couldn't agree more that human trafficking is an appalling form of modern slavery. They're estimated to be more slaves today than at any time in human history, as I think we all heard yesterday. Now, people say, why? It's a lack of general awareness. It's poor data. It's insufficient legal systems. Most absent of all is a coordinated international campaign. Responsible national governments worldwide need to act together on this terrible issue with a unified purpose. As you've seen on the projection and comments already made, there's a related scourge of organ pillaging, which we're speaking to obviously today. It's been going on, as you've heard, for about 20 years. In mid-2006, the Coalition to Investigate the Persecution of Falun Gong asked David Matus and I to investigate it. We were both went into it with open minds. We were, I think, both of us hoping it wasn't going to be true, but we very quickly discovered that it was true. And there's been reference to 50 kinds of evidence. I was a prosecutor for 10 years, so I should know something about evidence. And we came up with our report, a revised report, and then a book called Bloody Harvest. And we've continued to investigate ever since. We concluded that for 41,500 transplants done in the years 2000 to 2005 in China, the only reasonable explanation for sourcing was Falun Gong. Here are just two kinds of evidence of the 18 substantive kinds of evidence we found. We had people calling to institutions across China, hospitals, prisons, and so on, mostly hospitals, asking if they had Falun Gong organs available. I think you mentioned, Sasha, that, or no, actually it was Robert who mentioned yesterday that Falun Gong don't smoke or drink. They're very healthy, and that's the reason that people wanted Falun Gong organs, and we discovered that. And as I think it was mentioned in the film, that only Falun Gong were examined by doctors coming into these forced labor camps. And of course they wondered, why are you examining me when you're torturing me to give up my Falun Gong beliefs? So, and the way it works, of course, is that when somebody arrives in Shanghai, the #1 people's hospital in Shanghai is where most people go from Europe. They're blood tested and so on, and then they go out on the computer and they find a match for somebody through this testing of Falun Gong, and they go out to the camp and they grab the poor man or woman and they give them a potassium, now it appears, and their liver or whatever is taken out. It's flown to Shanghai, and somebody comes back to London with a new liver, and they're probably told they're getting it from a convicted murderer, although of course they don't want it from a convicted murderer, they want it from a Falun Gong practitioner. But this is just absolutely sick beyond belief that this is happening, and I wonder how many of you, probably all of you, are aware of it, but I'm always astounded at how many people are not aware that this has been going on since 2000. It's got to stop, and I really think, Ethan and Enver will speak about this too, I think we're close to the point where they're going to stop, because they're getting so much bad publicity about it. Falun Gong practitioners who got out of China told us that they'd been in camps. They told us that what had happened to them. I just described it to you a bit. This was necessary to create a live bank of donors. And the next part of my talk was dealing with the slaughter, which, how many years did you spend working on that book?
7, but I took 2 hours to make a snack in the kitchen.
All right, well, your book went up to 2008. It came out in 2014. I hope you've all got a copy of it. It's a marvelous book. And your closing words, are you going to read your closing words to the... No, I won't. All right, well, let me read them to you. Then I think you'll agree with, I hope you'll agree with them. No Western entity possesses the moral authority to allow the party, the Communist Party of China, to impede the excavation of a crime against humanity in exchange for promises of medical reform. As a survival mechanism for our species, we must contextualize, evaluate, and ultimately learn from every human descent into mass murder. The critical thing is that there is a history, and only the victims' families can absolve the party from its weight, close quote. Ethan and David Matus and I released an update in June of 2016 in Washington, Ottawa, and Brussels. You can access it from our website. I hope you all will. It's got 470 footnotes. We don't want you to read the footnotes, but 700 pages depending on the font size. You'd agree? So we've really gone into these hospitals very, very carefully. We concluded that by looking at things like medical journals and nurses' journals, all kinds of things, that hidden websites and hidden archive material, that this is a state-run system across China, and it's run by the government, and I think you heard on the tape, it's the only place in the world where the government runs this heinous system of killing human beings. We concluded cautiously that a minimum of 60,000 transplants per year are being done across China, not the approximately 10,000 the government likes to convince people that they're doing. There's a very small pool of voluntary donors, and maybe Ethan will speak about that, plus a few thousand convicted prisoners. By my lawyer's arithmetic, which you know is not good, about 150 people a day are being killed for their organs in China. That's a lot of human beings. We provide much evidence of a state-directed organ transplantation network controlled through national policies and funding and implicating both the military and the civilian broadcast systems. This all stopped in January 2015. If you believe that, I've got some swampland I'd like to talk to you about. Is there swampland near London? And they use a semantical trick that reclassifies prisoner organs as being voluntary donations. That's the way they try to pull the wool over our eyes. Now, professionals who should know better, I include in that the World Health Organization, the Transplantation Society, the TTS, the Pontifical Academy of Sciences, have accepted the party line skipping over is Louisa Greve, who worked for the National Endowment for Democracy in East Asia for many years. Quote, the admission that China's billion-dollar transplantation industry was built on prisoner organs, close quote. Last fall, after a screening of the Peabody Award-winning film Human Harvest at a theater in Boston's Harvard Square, I stressed some points made by David Matus, which I agree with completely, and I'll just give you some of them. As you probably all know, mental health professionals responded globally to what the Soviet Union was doing with their psychiatric practices and helped, I think, to end it. But the global transplantation profession can be broken into three groups today, ladies and gentlemen. The aware, that's the DAFO group, who have read the research and realize that what's going on in China with transplantation is mass killing of innocents and cover-up. They react accordingly, distancing themselves from the Chinese transplant profession, encouraging others to do likewise. The naive, who do not consider the research and argue that doing so falls outside of their area of expertise. They hear research conclusions on the one hand and party-state propaganda on the other, and they draw no conclusion. The foolish buy the Chinese party-state propaganda. They parrot its line that research demonstrating mass killings of innocent is based on rumor. They echo the party line that research is unverifiable, although it is both verified and verifiable. They repeat its claim that abuses are in the past when they are not. They say they don't have the time to read research into transplant abuse in China, or the grace to invite people like Ethan and Enver to their conferences that they arrange quite often. Outside of China, organ sources are either dead, or at least brain dead, before the sourcing, and alive both before and afterwards. China is the only country on earth, ladies and gentlemen, where sources are killed by organ extraction and where sources are alive before and dead afterwards. Beijing has no credible answers to the work of independent researchers who have demonstrated the mass killing of innocents. And actually, Dr. Toti is one of the most persuasive, because as you'll hear in a moment, or a few moments, he was one of the surgeons who first did these operations, and I suspect he'll talk to you about that. Given the scale of the transplantation industry in China, it's impossible to deny the search in any credible manner. Party propaganda denying official data, pretending what is there is not there, can persuade only the gullible or the willfully blind. One can only hope the willingness to confront the truth about China will prevail generally in the transplantation profession before many more innocents are killed for their organs. Yeah, I think I've mentioned the forced labor camps. It's in the text if you want to read it. But the really important point is that these people are sent on the police signature to these forced labor camps across China. A model, by the way, created by Joseph Stalin and Adolf Hitler. There are no hearing, no appeals, nothing. They work 16 hours a day, we're told. They make consumer products. We've heard about people making Homer Simpson slippers, McDonald's toys, Christmas decorations, obviously for multinational companies outside of China. And as I say here, inmates, this constitutes gross corporate irresponsibility and a violation of WTO rules, calling for an effective response by all trading partners of China. The U.S. had a law saying you couldn't import products made with slave labor, but I think Ethan will agree they didn't enforce it. About a year and a half ago, I think they tried to tighten it up, and I hope they're enforcing it now, but I think it's the only country that does have such a law, hopefully now enforced. So in conclusion, yeah, you might find this of interest. James Mann, author of China Fantasy and former Beijing bureau chief of the Los Angeles Times, says, quote, and it's so true, I think you'll agree, democratic governments around the world need to collaborate more often in condemning Chinese repression, not just in private meetings, but in public as well. Why should there be a one-way street in which Chinese leaders send their own children to America's and I'm sure Britain's best schools and universities while locking up lawyers at home? The Chinese regime is not going to open up because of our trade with it. And I know Premier Wen Jiabao is actually somebody I admire, and just before he left office he said, quote, without the success of political structural reform, it's impossible for us to fully institute economic structural reform. The gains we have made may be lost, and such an historical tragedy as the Cultural Revolution may happen again. I don't have to tell any of you that President Xi has just been made president for life, and you probably all know too that some of Mao's worst acts occurred after he was made, or he was president for life, and some of the things he did, many of the things he did, which were truly horrible, were done because he was there for life. Governments and business elsewhere and businesses everywhere should examine why they're supporting the violation of so many human rights in order to increase trade and investment with China. It's resulted mostly in national jobs being outsourced. I wonder how many jobs have gone from Britain to China, or Canada, or the U.S. U.S., by the way, estimates it's about 20 million jobs have gone to China, and about 50,000 factories have closed. Most of them have moved to China. Are we so focused on access to inexpensive consumer goods that we ignore the human, social, and natural environment costs paid by abused Chinese nationals to produce them? So finally, in final conclusion, the first step in a better direction is to end organ pillaging, trafficking, tourism now. Ponder the reality that even if only 60,000 transplants per year are being done across China, as I said before, that means about 150 people a day are being killed for their organs. Permit me to invite all of you to join our international coalition against organ abuse in China, which you can do very easily by simply going on our website, endorganpillaging.org. Thank you.
Bravo. I could see two possible remedies, and there might be difficulties in enforcing them, but I'd just like to throw them in at this stage, and perhaps, Ethan, you might want to respond to them. Firstly, if it was made illegal domestically for anybody to receive an organ transplant in or from China, full stop. Second is use the International Criminal Court or a similar body to name the people involved, not necessarily every member of the Communist Party, but the same thing was done after the war, where individual camp guards were named and were prosecuted and issue international arrest warrants. Now, they might be unenforceable in China, but it would certainly stop the bastards from travelling to other countries.
Ethan, I'm sure everybody will have something to say, but just on your first point, I couldn't agree more. You don't even have to say China, because, as I said, there's only one country in the world where this happens. You just have to say receive a trafficked organ. And that way you don't have to mention, the unmentionable word China in your legislation.
Right.
That's what. Thank you so much.
The second point.
But let me also emphasize, because I was deeply impressed, and I own both books. I wish I had brought them here to be signed by the authors. But it's other countries too, because there are people being kidnapped off the street, and so trafficked organs are an international thing, even though this is the poster child for organized trafficking.
Well, I'm going to dispute that point a little bit. What we know about trafficked organs is that it usually doesn't result in the death of the. That's the difference. Every organ is used. The hair is used. The fat is used. The skin cells are used for collagen beauty products, which British women put on their faces every night. I mean, this is something that the BBC discovers every 3 years. You can set your watch by it. But, and then they ignore the organ harvesting of prisoners of conscience issue. So I do feel like there's a fairly big distinction. Honestly, and it's a terrible thing to say, but, if I were an Indian farmer in a poor village and I had a bright young son or daughter who was going to go to university, I'd sell a kidney. Might lower my chances of living for a year or two, but I consider that it is a form of human exploitation, but not like this. This is a step further. And let me explain why I say that. If I get back to so this is sort of an interesting picture, and it doesn't. I like this picture very much, and if you look at it, it's an execution ground. We don't know exactly where. We think it's in Xinjiang, China. Look at the expressions. I don't know if you can see it that clearly, but if you look at the expressions of the faces, you've got one who's sort of reserved, he's holding himself back, and he's trying to look official. You've got another one who's trying to pretend it's all a big joke. Actually, I think he's probably a Uyghur, based on the mustache. And the one in the front is looking at us defiantly, because he's the one who just did the shooting. You see that rag on his arm? That's to prevent his uniform from getting stained from the back splatter as he fires the gun into the heads of the people that he shot. And you can see the people that have been shot there. And the reason we have this picture at all is because this is not in China, this is an acceptable picture. These people did something. There's big character posters explaining exactly what crime they're capable of, or what crime they did. So this was a legal procedure for many years. And in fact, to this day, if China became a democracy suddenly, I have no idea whether or not they'd repeal the death penalty or they'd keep it. There are cultural differences. But I think the significance of this form of organ harvesting is this. These are the new executioners. In other words, this is not really a money-based. And the backbone of this whole thing is that it came from the Communist Party's desire to control populations, not to make money. I mean, making the money is in China, these things often get mixed up like they do anywhere. But money is really the corruption that kind of, the sort of gasoline that keeps the engine going. But the original creation of that engine was from the state. Now, these are increasingly, for the last 20 years, really since 1997, these have become potential executioners, and now they really are the ones who do it. These people are done while they're alive, and so forth. We'll get into that. I just want to introduce the books very quickly. You already have a couple of them. So Bloody Harvest, of course, is David Matus and David Kilgore, and laid down the foundation of this entire thing. It's the seminal work. It covered an amazing amount of ground, particularly given the time they did the investigation in, which it still astounds me. State Organs is an interesting book that kind of shows a building coalition about this issue, and has doctors from all over the world talking about how they relate to this issue. The Slaughter's my book. That's 2014. It's on Amazon. You know, you can get the download very quickly if you go for the e-edition, and I get more money. The update is, David mentioned it. It basically showed one thing with its 2,300 footnotes and so forth, which mostly were Chinese sources, about 90% of them. What it showed was that, you know, it's not 10,000 transplants per year. That's a Chinese claim. It's just kind of an offhand figure. It's 60,000 or to 100,000 easily. Phenomenal. That's a phenomenal figure, and it means the Chinese are by far #1 in the world in this industry. Now, I also want to dispute a little bit one thing you said, which is about the mainstream media. Now, the fact is, the mainstream media has covered this issue. It's been in the New York Times 6 times over the last year and a half. People just don't look at the articles. They don't click on them, okay? That's the truth. It's been in the Globe and Mail. It was in CNN. Our report was directly reported on in CNN and Times of London, Independent, Guardian, Telegraph. People don't click on this stuff. There's not a lot of concern about it, and this is the truth. And in fact, the resolution that we'd fought so hard for, and particularly Torsten Trey of Doctors Against Forced Organ Harvesting, passed. This resolution passed in Congress in 2016. It passed in 2 weeks later in the European Parliament. They passed almost exactly the same resolution. Now, the Council didn't pick it up, but nonetheless, the statement was made. Now, in fact, the country that's held back a bit, through no fault of Ben Rogers here, because he's one of the authors of this report, The Darkest Moment, which was the Tory report, and did make organ harvesting a big part of its analysis of human rights abuses in China. But the Foreign Office has been, really refuses to move on this issue, and actually refuses to cooperate with the European Parliament and with, strangely enough, with the Congressional Executive Commission on China in the U.S. on this. I don't know why. It's a big mystery. But the bigger mystery was what happened in China, and this map is just to give you, that's a map taken from my book, and it's really just relevant sites and locations out of my book. If you were to actually cover all the places where organ harvesting takes place and all the prisons and hospitals and so forth, you'd have a black mass over the entire East Coast. But we can sort of, if we look to the northwest there, in that desert region up there, that's Urumqi. This is the home of the Uyghurs. The home is Xinjiang, which is Uyghurs call East Turkestan. And it's at the Air Force Hospital that our story begins, and Enver will talk about that.
The Urumqi Central Railway Hospital, this is where I used to work.
Yeah, I know. Okay, sorry. Okay, so that's right. Actually, the Air Force Hospital is where the first organ from a political prisoner that we know of was sold in 1997. So in other words, there was an uprising. Enver will do his own story. But there was an uprising, a small uprising in a place called Gulja in 1997. And it was followed by a big crackdown. And during that crackdown, several things happened, but basically people were taken away. And young Uyghur men disappeared, and then one nurse, in fact, became convinced that this one guy was going to be harvested for his organs. He was a political prisoner. Huge distinction. He's a man who's committed no crimes. He's put his arm, Allah Akbar, something like that. That's his crime. Okay, we'll get to that. But let's go back again to before that happens. We had an established system of execution in China. Again, another picture that's come out of China. This is not considered a shocking picture. This woman killed her husband while he was sleeping. It's often used by dissidents to sort of show the brutality of China, but in fact, in China, this was kind of a popular picture. It showed justice. Now, the important thing here, though, is that they started using these organs of prisoners, and that's how the industry began. This man, I interviewed him. He described coming up to a corpse after execution and finding that every body part had been taken out. Right. He kept screaming, empty, empty. The corpse was empty. Okay, so this man, in 1994, something distinctive happens again in that area in Xinjiang, which is, he describes, he is a Uyghur guard who worked with the Public Security Bureau, the Gestapo or whatever, of China, and he describes screams coming out of the organ harvesting vans that were at the mobile execution sites, as if people were still alive when they were going in. That's the distinction. Enver's right here. He'll talk about the next part of that in 1995. Gulja is 1997. That's where you have this mild uprising, which is followed by, this was a policeman who talks about how suddenly they started patrolling the cemeteries. Okay, so young men were disappearing, and suddenly the cemeteries were completely off limits. The reason why was because the bodies were essentially being stripped before they went to the graves. At the same time, you have a comprehensive blood testing for the first time of political prisoners in particular. And this is done on behalf of 6 high-ranking Chinese cadres who arrive in Urumqi looking for organs. They get their organs eventually, and I talked to the doctor who did the testing of the prisoners. That's not him in the picture. I don't want to reveal his identity. And he did the testing, and they got their organs, and then 6 more arrived. So that was the beginning of the cycle of taking innocent people and killing them for their organs. But it was kept very quiet, and the whole Xinjiang region is very separated from China, and so it was easy to control that. And I don't see any sign that it started to become policy for the rest of the country. And we have kind of a missing link at that point between Enver, who can talk about this with direct experience, and other doctors. And here is one. In 2004, this doctor, his name is Dr. Ko Enje. Some of you may know him as the mayor of Taipei. So he was a surgeon. He went to China. He was looking into organs for his clinic. And everybody knew you go to China. That's a very short waiting list, about 2 weeks. Get an organ anywhere else, you wait 2 years. So he goes and he looks into prices. And he was told, well, we will give you all, the foreigner price, essentially. And he bargained. He said, I want the Chinese price. I'm your cousin. They got to know each other, and he finally expressed, he said, look, I'm not even sure that these organs are any good. They're coming from drug addicts. They're coming from hardened criminals. These people, they drink, they smoke, they're a real problem. They finally said, well, look, you don't understand. All these organs are coming from Falun Gong. Okay. These people, they don't drink, they don't smoke, they practice this very healthy form of Qigong, and, all your patients are going to be healthy like them. So don't worry. And he actually, this became a big issue in his election and may become an issue in when he becomes prime minister of Taiwan as well, president of Taiwan. At any rate, let's move to Falun Gong itself. How did that happen? The big question I usually get, and we often get, is why? Why the persecution? And I would argue that there are different reasons at different times. I mean, initially it starts very much partially because of this man Jiang Zemin, partially because the group was just too large, considered to be too big, partially because the Public Security Bureau had muscles that were kind of atrophying and needed to be flexed. All these reasons are there, but I think the biggest reason is right in here. The fact is, this is starting in the real heart of northern China, Shenyang, Beijing, Tianjin, Changchun. And it was also spreading. It didn't have any limits. It was urban. It was rural. It seemed to go into the intelligentsia very, very quickly. So you had peasants who couldn't even read, combined with top university professors. And it went here. And yes, but they really feared is that little boy there, okay? When the Chinese Communist Party was looking at that little boy wearing the army uniform, and who was growing up to be a guy like this, who was performing the exercises openly, military guys. And this woman, now she was a very nice old woman who taught the exercises, the Falun Gong exercises, but she taught them to some unusual groups. China Central Television, the Public Security Bureau of China, the top leadership, the wives of the top leaders. She taught them all the exercises. And she's a very normal woman, sort of doing extraordinary things. But this threatened, this woman is what scared the Chinese Communist Party. This was like a fire which had spread throughout the entire system. And to a Marxist, this was the Marxist method of seizure of power, right there, in front of their eyes. Especially to see that linking up to the top leadership. So the repression begins, and that was, some of the people who worked on that repression were perfectly nice guys too. Like this one ran a labor camp. And he actually set it up. He said, I'm like a Schindler. I tried very hard to make sure that the Falun Gong women that I was looking after would be taken care of and I would protect them. But this woman starved to death under his watch. Her throat was damaged through forced feeding. This is a fact. Some Schindler. The other cause of you could say Falun Gong did not give up. It was an unusual group that way. It did not fade away. This guy led the first successful hijacking of television signals in Chinese history. An entire city, Changchun, was taken over for 1 hour. All the television signals. It was an amazing story. And these are other pictures that the Chinese put out of the other part of the gang. So this was, Falun Gong in its heyday. In fact, we saw something in the film briefly of that same, that's in Dalian. That's in Dalian, and people are gathering for morning exercises. But these people went here to Shenyang Prison City. That's Shenyang Prison City under construction. This is what it looks like today. It's enormous. We've never really seen structures like this. There's no penal systems like this anywhere in the world. This is a much smaller prison, Guangdong prison, but what's interesting is if you look at that red area there, that was where the buses would pull in every 6 months to gather Falun Gong practitioners to be taken away for organ harvesting. These are the hospitals two of the major hospitals in Shenyang, which actually organ harvested them. And I'll just go through this very briefly. This is this was probably the top policeman in China. He was the right-hand man of a man named Bo Xilai, who was a contender for the presidency of China. That's him running the operations. He had his own center, a chop shop for we believe Falun Gong, Uyghurs, and so forth. And there's a complicated story surrounding that, showing how this was really the turning point where the Chinese began to get worried that there was too much exposure. Now, just say a word about numbers. If you leave that guy in the middle out of the picture, you've got a very good representation of Falun Gong refugees. All 5 women had been in labor camp. All 5 women had been tortured. One of them, I'm not saying which one, was sexually abused very severely. And the one on the left was given blood tests that were clearly for organ tissue matching. They were looking at her very closely for her organs. Out of that, I pull a number, 65,000. It's a much more complicated procedure than that, but it's really a wartime estimate. We don't really have a firm grasp on the numbers. That was 65,000 for 2000, 2008. They have, Gourmetis is 41,500 between 2001 to 2005. We all find it very hard to make good calculations on how many people are actually dead, though I do believe it is in the hundreds of thousands at this point. Going back to the map for a second, the last group I just mentioned about, although House Christians and specifically Eastern Lightning have been harvested, or at least looked at for harvesting for their organs, is the Tibetans. The Tibetans, now the thing that held the Tibetans back, the reason they didn't harvest them initially was they simply did not have, look at that infrastructure. There was nothing there. They didn't even have a close-by hospital. But eventually, now they built them, okay? And it came in as soon as Bombardier made that train deal to have that super-fast train. That sat on my desk in Beijing for months, that stupid deal. That's when they started shipping out Tibetan organs. David mentioned this very well, so I don't really have to go into it. He mentioned, it's so odd, the relationship we have with these people. He's in that first film. This is Delmonico, Francis Delmonico, the head of the TTS. In some ways, he's our frenemy. He's our frenemy. He basically has made a deal with the Chinese that he won't say anything impolite about prisoners of conscience, and in exchange, they'll reform. That's his deal. Now, that's a perfectly reasonable deal in many parts of the world. But what I do resent about this fellow and these fellows in general is that they act like they know something about China. They do not. China is a very difficult country. Human rights is actually a field which I think takes some expertise. I don't even think I'm an expert in it. But there are some. But they don't listen to those people. They don't listen to the China experts. It's just like some naive businessmen coming in and getting fleeced in China, and it happens every day. And this time, it happens that he's not losing money for his company, he's losing lives in the world. So this is really an appalling thing, and I'm happy to take question on it. Having said that, I mean, and there's also so much hypocrisy there. This hospital there, and while they were making this kind of deal and saying nice things about China, this Tianjin Hospital was advertising on the web in English to say, come to China, get your organs. Okay? That was happening. It was happening all the way into 2014. It stopped about 6 months before my book came out. This is completely against Chinese law. In 2007, they passed a law saying absolutely no foreigners can come to China for organs. What are we making a deal here? This is that's Tianjin Hospital. It does 5,000 transplants a year. 5,000. It's the biggest hospital in the world for transplants. China's claiming it's only doing 10,000 transplants a year in the whole country. This is the Vatican. This is a Vatican meeting a year ago, and they invited the Chinese. They came under a lot of flack. Again, the press did step in. The New York Times ran an article saying this is very controversial that the Chinese are there. So again, there has been some mainstream approach. It just hasn't sort of caught the popular imagination. There has been some mainstream coverage of this. I'll skip through the numbers very quickly. You can just get an idea. This is enormous. I think there's one final thing that I see as the ultimate hypocrisy. This is a Nobel Peace Prize winner, and he's dying in his bed because the Chinese let him die. I mean, there's no way they gave him proper treatment, and they did this in front of the entire world. And yet, we're supposed to believe anything from the Chinese medical establishment. This woman, 2013, it never stopped. She was given an organs-only examination along with 500 other Falun Gong practitioners in a single day. And now the final chapter. even if one believes that, and there is some evidence that Falun Gong persecution is tailing off a bit, okay, that they're, at least on the local level, the people are more relaxed and the PSB isn't really going after them at the same rate. It started over again in Xinjiang. So the Uyghurs, who up till now really weren't big targets of organ harvesting, what I'm going to describe to you next is science fiction. We have 17 million Uyghurs. That's every man, woman, and child who's Uyghur in Xinjiang has been now tested, blood tested, and DNA tested. That happened in the last year. And we've just now learned about it. Now, then, only 2 weeks ago, the Congressional Executive Commission on China came out with a report saying that 500,000 to 1 million Uyghurs are now detained. They're incarcerated in re-education camps. These are very high numbers. This was the same number we had with Falun Gong that I estimated, 500,000 to 1 million at any given time. Now those numbers aren't perfect. I'm sure there's a bit of a revolving door. Sentences can range from 1 weekend to 20 years. But we are going to start seeing the same sorts of things coming out of this. We're seeing torture, even new methods of torture. And so I really don't know what to say about that except that one thing. I live here, actually. I mean, I'm a British citizen as well as an American citizen. And I am somewhat ashamed in my country, in my new country, for not grappling with this problem properly. For not, at least, don't run with the Vatican. At least run with your allies. Run with America. Run with the European Union. I mean, this is. So I think that's the very least that could be done, is to make at least go through the measure of condemning this procedure. And that's what I wanted.
Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for this opportunity. I take every time I take such opportunity as to do testimony and also as confession, because that traumatization caused by the thing I have done in my head, it is too heavy to carry. So that's why in 9 years ago, when Itnj was presenting the book in the Parliament, and when he said, "It is difficult to find first-hand evidence," and I said, "No, this is the time. I need to speak out." So since then, we become friends. The most, you have heard this to the distinguished speakers give you the general picture. I'm here to tell you how this kind of thing can happen in China. Because it can. Because I just done one. There's fundamentally difference between Western mind and the Eastern mind. The Western people, they assume innocent until proven guilty. In East, no, that is other way around. So if you look at that, your heart, my skin must be different. That is philosophy of Chinese culture. So. And this culture has been well adopted by the Chinese communist regime. So what this says is anyone labeled himself other than member of Communist Party, his heart must be different. Therefore, you are subject to whatever punishment available. And a person like me, born to that society, just like born straight into the washing machine and get my brain washed. So I genuinely believe whatever I have been told from the school, it's true. Just imagine this, the people in North Korea now. It is who I was back then. I believed it. So how I believe that anyone condemned to death by the authority is enemy of the state. And me, as the surgeon of this country, I have moral duty to eliminate the enemy of the state. And this is our mentality. Of course, I have discovered what is called human rights, what is called this civilization when I come to this country. And that is how I decided to speak out. So I saw audience and judge, they are new, so I should tell you my experience. I used to work in the Urumqi Railway Central Hospital of Urumqi as a surgeon. And we have a tour of duty to work at the outpatient department. In 1990, I spent 6 months in the outpatient department. And in that time, there was a rumor in air that somebody is stealing children's kidney. That was in air. So many farmers around Urumqi city bring their child who went missing and for 3 months. Because I'm the only one who speaks local language, so they bring the children to me, asking me to examine them if there's an organ missing. According to my record, there was more than 100, and I found 3 of them. They have scar on their body. From that scar, I can tell 1 kidney has been taken. So those 3 cases later on being proved by ultrasound examination, and they found 1 kidney missing. So that is as early as 1990. In 1995, I think that was a Wednesday, because my scheduled theater time is Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And that Wednesday, I happened to be the one free, didn't have operation. So one day before, Tuesday afternoon, my 2 chief surgeons called me into their office and said, "Do you want to do something wild?" I said, "Of course." I was so excited because I'm young. And something wild, it means you don't get a chance to do it. Then he said, "You assemble a team and bring the mobile operation equipment and meet us at the hospital gate tomorrow 9:30. So I did. 9:30, I have my teams and with our one. And the 2 chief surgeons appeared with a car and they told us that, "Follow us." Of course, we all were young, we were so excited, said, "Well, what are we going to do?" Then we followed them. From that direction, traveling towards the west, I know that in the Western Mountain area, we have a branch hospital. I thought we were going there, but halfway we turned left again, straight to the mountain area. And I got lost. I said, "Where are we going?" Our driver, he knows. He said, "We are going to the execution ground." Execution ground, what are we going to do there? We are actually little scared. What are we going to do there? Anyway, we have been told to go, we have to go. Then we arrived there, the execution ground, it was behind a hill. 2 chief surgeons told us, "You wait here, behind this hill. When you hear the gunshots, you just turn around and go inside." Then we went silent. Everybody just not stopping smoking and standing there, don't know what to do. Probably 40 or 50 minutes later, we heard gunshots. And that wasn't not a machine gun fire. It is many rifles shot at the same time. We can tell them. So that is like this order. We rushed in. On the left side, there's a hill And on the slope of the hill, we can see 5 or 6 or 7, I don't exactly know how many, executed body. The shot is to the head from here. So the front of head is blown away. And you can see all these executed prisoners, they are shaved like me, with prisoners' clothes. It's different. Then there's a police officer said, go to the far right, and that one is yours. I said, why is mine? Anyway, we went there, and the 2 chief surgeons said, okay, now you take this body into your one and extract the liver and the 2 kidneys. Now I understood what my duty was. And this man was wearing civilian clothes with hair, long hair. And the shot is to his right chest here. As a surgeon, I know that is a deliberately act. Just make sure you will die, but not die immediately. So I have time to extract the organs. So when we put this into one, and the 2 chief surgeons guiding or observing, standing there and say, okay, you do, starting. What is the knife called? Scalpel. That's why I couldn't pass the exam. When I cut through his body, skin, he tried to struggle.
Avoid it, yes.
Yeah. And he was too weak to resist against my action. And I can see blood come out. It means the heart is still beating. So he was alive. He was actually alive. At that moment, my whole body turned into a robot, just carrying the duty which I was programmed to do. Finally, I removed organs, and the chief surgeon said, now you take your team back to the hospital. Remember, nothing happened today. As a man born to that society, I know what that means. Since that day, none of us has ever talked about it, because we try to forget about it. And then 2 chief surgeons, they took these organs and they left. So where those organs have gone, I don't know. I have no idea. And that is my experience I'm sharing with you. Since I started campaigning this with my friends, the most question come forward to me is, how on earth your doctor is supposed to save people's life? You are killing it.
If you simply said, no, I'm not going to do it at that time, would you have been killed also? For that, we have to understand the Chinese system. Chinese system, that time, it is one single employer, that is state. Everybody is working for the state. If you don't obey the order, then you're out of a job. If you're out of job in that time, China, it means you're done. You cannot get any job anymore. Your life is done. And if I may, and so you were made to repeat this terrible experience.
Oh, no.
No.
What happened was, I guess it was because I was the only one free on that day, so I was chosen. And also, in 1995, in Xinjiang,
the scale of this operation, it wasn't that big. And the reason they chosen these Uyghur people, because there's nobody else on earth is speaking for us, so nobody cared. And that's how they turned our homeland into laboratory, gigantic laboratory. Then there were not only this organ harvesting, they also tested 46 nuclear bombs in my homeland since 1964 to 1996. And I was the campaigner against this, for the campaigner for the nuclear victim. And I produced a documentary film called The Death on the Silk Road to expose this victim of nuclear tests. And this is my second subject of campaigning. And let me show you this. This is a group of surgeons who published the medical paper in one of Chinese top medical journal, surgical journal. And it says, donor brought into the theater, general anesthetic applied, and truncal intubation applied. This suggests the donor is alive. And if this surgery is kidney transplantation, that's fine, because I can sell one kidney and take my money, go home. But this title says 2 cases of heart and lungs combined transplantation. And this kind of paper published in top Chinese medical journal, they openly admit they are killing this donor. Just like that slide which my friend Itnj showed you, those police, they are killing this in the field. They actually brought that execution ground into the medical theater. They kill you inside theater. They took your organs, give it to somebody else, and they leave you because you are no use anymore. And they don't tell you what happens. And that is chilling demonstration of the Chinese darkest secret. Imagining you are buying thing from Amazon. You have business partner that you can buy one, get one free, or if you don't like it, you can give it back. But can you imagine this kind of business pattern also in organ transplantation? You can buy one, get one free? You get one organ free? Yes, it is true, and it is happening in China. And in emergency cases, you can get one organ in 4 hours' time. The Vice President of the United States, is it Dick Cheney? I think he waited 2.5 years. But in China, liver you only need to wait for 1 week for a liver. So they know in 1 week time somebody will die, and his liver just match yours. He knows that. How? Without a pool of human beings, they kept in the dark. Without this, they cannot achieve this. You cannot achieve unlimited supply of organs if you don't have this. Just imagine how big the Amazon stock is. And I believe Chinese organ stock probably even bigger than that. This is 2006, April 28, Hunan Province People's Hospital. They try to promote their business. They give away 20 organs for free. First come, first serve, for free. So can you imagine? It is beyond your imagination. how you have so much organs you can just giving away? This is the former Chinese health minister Huang Jiafu, who carried out one self-liver transplantation in Urumqi. Self-liver transplantation, it means the patient had liver cancer. You took the whole liver out, you cut that cancer part and put the rest liver back. For this kind of operation, you have to have at least 2 liver to back up. In case this liver didn't survive, then you will immediately use another one. So they found 2 liver, one is from Guangzhou, one is from Chongqing. See that distance from Guangzhou to Urumqi, flight is 4-5 hours. And the liver can stay alive 6 or 8 hours, I guess. So if you take this liver from Guangzhou and transport it to Urumqi, maybe by the time the liver is dead. So what they do, they transport the human being. They take human being with them and go there and say, okay, your crime is terrorism. Then they execute you in the theater and get your liver. In this case, his operation was successful, but he wasted 2 livers. So they have such luxury, plenty of liver they can manage. So we suspect that we are saying that how you manage to keep unlimited supply of organs. Then Chinese government, they give us the answer. In 2016, there was a nationwide health examination project taking place in Xinjiang, 2016. It requires every single Uyghur person between 7 to 65 years old to have your blood tested. And they said it's for your health benefit. So my question was, because the nationwide health check, only you will do it if there's unknown disease or pandemic. You might do that to try to find why. But they didn't present this kind of thing. They just started saying, we are doing this health check. For what? They don't give the reason. So we said, you are building your database for organs. Then last year, they changed this health examination project into DNA collecting. Just like my friend said, 17 million Uyghur people now had their DNA registered on the computer. So I guess if you apply for an organ in Chinese website, probably you might get in 2 hours response. Yes, we found one in Xinjiang somewhere. Last year I went to Taiwan. I gave tour of lecture about this, and there was one man stood up and said, one of his friends who was aware of this Falun Gong situation, who went to China for kidney, and he particularly asked surgeon, say, I know the situation with Falun Gong, so I don't want this from Falun Gong. And this surgeon assured him that, don't worry, now all organs come from Xinjiang. So, is that true come from Xinjiang? Look at this one. This is a sign on the floor of one of the airport in Xinjiang. And that's the Chinese language, and the next one is an Arabic-looking language that is Uyghur language. So combination of these 2 languages, the sign only can be found in Xinjiang. And what it says, special passenger and a human organ transportation pathway, expressway, and that is at airport. So imagine how big this traffic is to make an airport give you special pathway to go freely. And that tells you the scale of this Chinese operation. Yes. Now, I want to play a 1.5 minute video, but I have to warn you, this video is so disturbing. Because of this margin or the profit of this organ trade in China, this has made everybody, many people try to get their hands on.
大家注意哈，大家注意哈，有人在3个板儿头在这呀，现在在下家这儿坐已经坐到2克了，湖南人，有人现在往安这方面跑了。是说的。又抓到2个，又抓到2个，河南的这些是又抓到2个。
他才200多，我凭的字写来了，这里谁？
This happened in Sichuan province. Those 2 guys, they got caught. They were stealing young boys, as you can see. And the weird thing is, they put these young boys in the box and put ice on it. For what purpose? Try to preserve this body. For what? I guess. Now probably we don't even need to guess. That is try to sell his organs. And that is what is happening in China. Thank you very much.
Dr. Enver Tohti, thank you very much indeed for that.
About the mainstream media, yes, Ethan Gutman is very right about that there has been presence in them. And my goal, and this is why I got in contact with David and Ethan and Enver, to bring them on some talk shows, ladies and gentlemen. But I truly hope, and this is the breakthrough that I'm looking for, on the mainstream in terms of Tucker Carlson and Fox News, Bill O'Reilly, where we can reach my dream, my aspiration, and I want to try and make it a reality, to bring these gentlemen on to these programs, to the Today Show in America, where millions of people tune in. That is my aspiration. So when that time comes, I would love to. But yes, the New York Times, the Washington Post, Newsweek have definitely had some wonderful effects on exposing this, and the BBC as well, and CNN. But again, I would love to bring more exposure to this through Tucker Carlson, Fox News, and other mainstream outlets that reach 5 to 6 million people a night. And we are getting there, I'm sure. I feel the breakthrough is imminent.
Yes, thank you very much for that. That testimony at the end was particularly important and affecting. So thank you very much for coming here for those questions and for your evidence as well. Just going through that, it seems to me that in your particular instance, it was not so much Falun Gong, but the Uyghurs themselves that were approached and put through and subjected to these abuses. And there are other groups as well. What other groups are involved?
Actually, all people who is not communist member will be subject to this, like Uyghurs, Mongolians, Tibetans, House of Church, Falun Gongs, all.
Okay, thank you very much. And the policies you say has been increasing since 2015 in regard to the Uyghurs.
Now, there are other explanations for doing DNA and blood testing. It's a combination of DNA and blood. So we don't even have to get into the issue of whether or not the DNA testing can be used for tissue matching. It probably can. But they're certainly doing blood tests as well on the same person in every case.
What other explanations could there be?
Well, it could be for their health, but there's no evidence of that whatsoever, as I think Enver said. It could be certainly for surveillance. DNA is used for surveillance. It's one of the ways you control it. The Chinese claim the Uyghurs are terrorists, or there's a huge terrorist element. And the quickest way to prevent terrorism is to threaten their families. And if you have the DNA, it's impossible for people to escape. They can't get out of that identification process. So I think that's certainly one of the explanations. I have no quarrel with that. That's Human Rights Watch are the ones who came out with the DNA findings initially, the Uyghurs.
And
they believed it was surveillance, and I don't disagree. What they didn't think about, though, was the tissue matching applications as well.
Could I please ask the learned surgeon to support the justice's question? Is there a test that can be done for tissue matching that could be concealed within a national health examination?
Yes, because it says that national health examination, they took blood. And the blood, you can do whatever you want. You can test whatever you want.
That leads to tissue matching.
Yes, that is what we believe. Then they turn into DNA collecting. But the problem is you can collect DNA by just swap your cheek inside, but they still taking blood. So we still suspect they are still doing this.
So, Doctor, your fear is that this is a precursor to genocide?
I believe so.
Okay.
With 500,000, I mean, it's the combination now that we now have 500,000 to 1 million people in detention at the same time, and these are the same people, and you've just done tissue matching tests, or tests that can be used for tissue matching on 17 million people. This is a very strange confluence. It's happened very, very quickly. These are alarming and very sudden developments.
Sorry, Your Grace, I just want to finish this line of approach. In regard to, in particular, the foreign tourists involved in this, this particularly unpleasant trade that's developed. Since 2015, has there been a law in place from the Chinese government in relation to foreign tourists? Was that part of that law or not?
The thing is, with Chinese government, the Western politicians has always predicted Chinese politics or Chinese politicians wrong. Why? Because they never do the things they promise to do. They never.
I'm just asking the question if there's a law in place or not.
There are many laws, but they don't just simply ignore it.
Okay. There is a law in place. It's been in place since 2007. It's been renewed several times, supposedly. A Washington Post reporter who was actually trying to do sort of a hit piece on us actually went to Tianjin Central, that large hospital you saw, and he noticed that there were actually a bunch of foreigners there who were waiting for organs. So, I mean, it's
pretty positive.
Yes, I mean, the South Korean, there's a second piece of evidence which is very important. The South Koreans, Falun Gong practitioners, were able to intercept a phone call from one of the top hospitals in Seoul where they are arranging a liver transplant on the mainland for one of their patients. This has become kind of a major scandal in Seoul. In fact, we've known about this for a year, and we held back on it, hoping that the Transplantation Society of Seoul would make certain reforms and that we could give them some time before we embarrass them. That's always the issue.
Okay. Then just to follow on, a couple of follow-on questions from that. Has there been any private prosecutions of foreign tourists who have flown into Itnj?
There have been no prosecutions of any foreign organ tourists. However, there are 4 countries which have basically banned foreign organ tourism. Israel was the first country to do it. In order, I believe it's Israel, Italy, Spain, and Taiwan.
And those remain at present time the only countries that forbid this sort of activity. This pretty gruesome.
That is correct. Thus, only some of them have actual consequences towards the people who come over. Most of them have done it surrounding doctors who would assist it. So there are slightly different approaches.
Okay, and so the doctor approach is to affect those people who are actually getting the financial benefit.
Yes, and that's right, and also just to keep doctors out of. Well, as you see, doctors tend to get in trouble whenever they go to China and they eat too many duck wings or something. I don't know what happens to them, but they seem to lose their minds. The main problem there was Taiwan. Was the issue was Dr. Cao, because that was a very big electoral issue, or whether or not he had become an organ broker in some element. And I actually wrote a letter saying I didn't think he was an organ broker at all. But the fact is that it was disturbing enough that it had reached into that, that had gone into that level, and that he hadn't talked about it to anybody except me. That was a kind of a problem. So the way they phrased it there was they said no doctor can be involved in setting up a patient relationship in China for organ tourism.
Thank you very much. If you've mentioned that there's 52 points of evidence and there's 18 particular ones, if those could be submitted to the bench at some point, that'd be excellent. But thank you very much for everything you've done. Thank you. Thank you.
Your Grace. Just a question in relation to what we've seen. This arrow with Arabic on it, rather than having other languages. Do you suspect that there are agents in the Arab world to facilitate the transfer of human?
That language is Uyghur language. We are Uyghur. We will live in northwest China. Most of them, they are Muslims, and so they use Arabic script, and that's Uyghur language, and that's it first. And secondly, what I say is that yes, the agent of coordinating this kind of thing, it is the government. Without government coordinating, there's nobody you can achieve this, because it needs jail, it needs police department, transport. Yes, this big law enforcement bodies, they have to work together.
Have the Chinese authorities either established or sought to establish Chinese operated hospitals in any other countries? I ask that for a particular reason, because I am aware of one particular move that was made a few years ago.
There is a new development in China. It's called China's Modern. China's Modern. What they're trying to do is China is trying to supply organ to the whole world, and that is very new. And there was a Chinese very rich man escaped China, and now he's in United States. His name is Guo Wengui. When he revealed that Chinese government, when they do this organ transplantation, some Western countries' politicians also received, but they didn't travel to China. Instead, there was airplane carried this donor, went to his home country, and they carried out there.
If I may, does that mean that the donor was executed on this foreign country's soil?
Yeah.
I just want to say I'm a little bit skeptical. The Belt and Road Initiative is a big program in China. Anybody who lives is in any way involved in any government agency has to express some support for the Belt and Road Initiative. It's a kind of ritual that they all have to do. And the fact that now Huang Jiefu, who's kind of the master of ceremonies of organ harvesting in China, has been saying things about how we're going to teach the whole world to sing on this Belt and Road Initiative, and we're going to have organs for everybody. I cannot tell if he's serious or if he's just simply dancing.
No, but let's not separate that from the evidence that appears that they will move the donor to the foreign country and kill the donor on foreign soil in order to make possible this transplant. That needs to be clearly and rigorously documented, but for me that is a major change and elevation.
That we need to speak to the man who is living in the United States now, called Guo Gui.
Right. This has been a problem before. I mean, we had several false leads on that before. They talked about the PLA delivering people to Japan by submarine. Harry Wu, when he was still alive, was extremely critical of the idea that organs had been flown into Thailand, although it had some ring of truth given the practice of a lot of organ transplantation taking place in Thailand. So I'm always a little leery about this.
Well, let me bring you back then to children. I've noticed that with Haiti, there have been Israeli hospitals and major movements by many multinationals, including Oxfam, who then take children from places like Haiti and move them to other countries. In your experience, is there any possibility that some of these children are being moved to other countries as potential organ donors? I'm looking for your personal perspective.
I'm not going to rule out this possibility because now in China, the missing person, it is a very big issue, and nobody actually is talking about it. In Xinjiang, since 1995, the estimation of that missing person has exceeded 100,000 missing. We don't know where are they.
One province.
One Xinjiang.
And how does that, as a statistic, bear against other provinces? Is it high or is it low for missing people?
Because other province, everybody talk about it, but there's no actual statistic yet.
There is some evidence of that China has now become the leader in certainly in sale of fetal body parts. It's anecdotal at this point, but that which would make perfect sense.
The Chief Justice.
I just wanted to make a suggestion from a Western point of view. It's difficult to get China to change anything that it really wants to do. We can't stop them setting up artificial islands. We can't stop them claiming the South China Sea. But I have a suggestion. A lot of Chinese go to Western countries, the United States, Great Britain, France, Germany, and so on. And I know when I've been to the United States and time when I had to obtain a visa, I was asked questions such as, have you ever worked for the Nazi party in Germany or anything like that? That used to be on the forms that people filled in. I suggest that there be an additional paragraph put on the visa forms for all countries, and I've actually written one out. I, the name goes in, have not been involved in any way with organ harvesting and transplantation, and I am totally opposed to such practice. I declare this under penalties for perjury.
That actually has been, that is on the American visa. Have you been involved in coercive organ transplantation? And the key reason why that's on there, that was a victory, because as David Matus puts it, it forces these doctors to lie. So they'll come in for conferences and so forth. But that's very important from a human rights perspective, because down the road, that's how you can really put the cuffs on them.
I mean, is it possible to extend that then?
Absolutely.
Because obviously, it's one of those ones where you just go, no. Right.
You know, we've been.
So the way to actually perhaps extend it, maybe it takes it a little bit far. I mean, we talk about a quarter of the world's population, but maybe it is something as simple as, until this is dealt with, are you a member of the medical profession?
Again, there's something we need to consider. For example, me. When I was doing it, I didn't feel guilty. And before Chinese medical reform in 2002, if any surgeon who was involved doing this, I think it is beyond his own decision, or he cannot control it. But after that, it's pretty much driven by money.
Mm-hmm. Very good. So
Yeah.
if there was a note within the passport visa application that precluded entry until this matter was sorted out to a degree, whether it be that you can't come in if you're a surgeon or you're a member of the medical profession, it's wide ranging and could be very difficult for a lot of conferences, but it would really highlight this issue, wouldn't it?
It does. It does, really does. And it also gives that warning to the surgeons.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah.
And also many Chinese doctors that paper presented to the outside international conferences are fake.
Mm-hmm.
Are fake anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So bar them, just tell them stay there.
Yeah, it'd be a big
Yeah.
statement. Okay, thank you very much, Doctor.
Thank you.
I have two more questions, but I want to make sure each commissioner has any more questions from the commissioners and the justices.
Just a
Your
question,
Grace?
Whether this has been dealt with at the United Nations level, human rights commissions here and there, and if so, any findings?
They completely ignored it.
Ignored?
Yeah, no, they were given the largest petition drive in history, and they didn't even respond.
How many petitions, roughly?
I believe it was 2.5 million.
2.5 million signatures to a petition that was ignored by the United Nations. We note that with interest.
WHO is also completely in China's camp.
I want to bring Mitchell Gerber back into this conversation, having heard him in Bali, and there is a video of that superb presentation. Before I bring Mitchell Gerber back into the conversation, I have a question for all of you. Are you aware of the executive order out of the United States under the current administration that appears to target human trafficking? And if you are aware of it, do you think it's useful at all?
I think the most promising thing I'm seeing, I'm not so aware of that, I'm very aware of the Magnitsky Act, because the State Department, this came from within the State Department, actually mid-levels of the State Department, as if a substitute teacher was running things and the kids could get away with anything they wanted. And they basically, that is the most promising point, is that if we can ban, say, 5 top doctors who both have doubled as liver surgeons and at the same time as anti-cult activities director for their province, you can take that profile, you can make those people toxic, radioactive, and they cannot come to any conferences in the UK or anywhere else, or at least in the US. That would be a profound move, biggest change we could see.
If I may then, let me, as my final question, ask Mitchell Gerber, who's done so much to put all this together, what haven't we asked, what needs to be said right now in this audience that we've overlooked?
I think what I would have loved to have seen are more people in terms of press, and I know you can, I completely agree, but my biggest concern is still also with the United Nations and with other bodies. I remember doing the work that I did in the United States for almost 17 years, coming as a United States citizen. The State Department and many governing bodies, the World Health Organization, still turning their backs, still being in, as Ethan was saying, in China's little campground. And what I hope to see, I think it's been pretty much covered here. And I take my hat off to the board, I take my hat off to Your Grace, Your Excellency, and Sasha Stone, and the people here that have so kindly lent their hearts, their ears, their minds. It really has been exposed today, but what I truly would like to see, as I was sharing with Tucker Carlson, the Today Show, Jimmy Kimmel, all these massive stars that sharing something about it. They all know, the celebrities all know. I mean, this has been going on for almost, again, since 2006 when David Kilgoy and David Mattis came on. But what really upsets me is they still choose to ignore the evidence, the substantial evidence, and I remember reading a report or an article from the Vision Times in 2015, who the reporter was talking to Ethan and reporting, and paraphrasing, forgive me for none of the exact words, but the reporter was saying with Ethan, you know, how do you know this is going on? And Ethan shared, well, look, you know, the dogs bark, the caravan moves on. No one can deny these are toxic allegations, but if you're not going to reach or read the corpus of evidence that have been submitted to this body, to other governing bodies, these gentlemen have been going around the world, as well as with Miss Anastasia Lin, who is the world Miss World Canada 2015-2016. But yet still looking at all the talk shows and all the media, I still do not see a breakthrough. And this is one big thing that I'm working on, that I'm constantly, you know, hammering, hitting their force fields, their shields. But I know China's, the communist regime is in power and is behind it all. They've taken over Hollywood in the United States. A lot of the mainstream media, especially on the left, has been bought out by the communist regime as well. So what I can do, and what I'm going to continue to, and what I would love to see, is these gentlemen go on the Today Show, go on Fox News and other organizations like that to reach the 10 million, you know, 20 million people a week that they have. So that's what I would like.
Thank you, Mitch Gerber. Thank you, Counsel, for that last question. That was very relevant. Gentlemen, what I will say is that the seminal objective of this Commission of Inquiry is to be able to composite a body of testimonial and put it before the General Assembly of the United Nations. Possibly not this year, but next year almost certainly. So your testimony will be embedded within that official Commission report and will be of considerable substance. We thank you for coming here today.